Well, welcome everybody to the Design Connection, City Design Thinking, CCX, EUX. It's really a privilege to come together as a community. We always love the fact that it's not always about the speakers, it's not about the organisers, it's actually about the people in this room who are coming to share ideas and share conversations and hopefully have an impact for positive change. And we are so grateful to have so many people here today and every month that we get to share these experiences and really think about design and think broader than design as well, because we don't want to just think about design, but it's also what can we do as a collective to really improve lives more broadly. We'll touch on a lot of that. Obviously today is a lot about International Women's Day, and we're going to have a theme of balancing the scales, so it is very much focused on the greater good and really looking at that gender equality and across the board. So you'll see that theme throughout. We've got some amazing speakers. I hope you're all looking forward to it as much as I am.
So we're standing on Gadigal, or sitting on Gadigal country tonight, land of the Eora Nation. So we acknowledge their leaders, past, present and emerging. This land is never ceded. So we also want to thank all of our sponsors, and there's a lot of them tonight. So it's a Design Connections event. So that's when our 3 meetups come together around a joint agenda. Tonight it's International Women's Day, so we have CCX Sydney, we have Enterprise UX, and we have Sydney Design Thinking Meetup. So you can see all of the organisers down at the bottom there. Lucas, myself, Ben, Susan. Where's Susan? I know you're and Adam, Vera, and Kevin. I'm not sure if Kevin's here.
Sylvia is the Sylvia's flying the CCX flag.
Yeah. And we also have Leapfrog Studio and Dynamic Walk.
You might want to give an intro to what Leapfrog Studio is or what Dynamic Walk is.
I reckon Adam wants to tell us about Blue Egg.
No, that's not it.
His lights don't work, doesn't it? No, but I think that is a good call out. So, Adam, do you want to tell us a bit about Blue Egg and
you can do the UX shout out while you're doing it.
Oh, thanks. Okay. We do design and stuff. Thanks for coming.
And Susan,
we do design and stuff. Thanks for coming.
It's the stuff bit that's really
it's just
interesting.
We do low bono stuff.
Yeah, we don't.
And Ben, any?
We do design and stuff as well as innovation, purpose and well-being.
Okay, so thank you everyone who have come together to make this night happen. Up until a month ago, we didn't have a venue, so special thanks to Adam. And yeah.
So what's next? So let's talk about what's next. So next month we've got Gordon Burnett. He actually runs the health prototyping at New South Wales Health Prototyping Lab. Does some really cool experiments in prototyping. So his whole job is understanding prototype in depth and really making those decisions around. I always call it the Goldilocks moment, like not too hard, not too soft, or like get the right level of fidelity. So he's going to really talk about how do you find that right level of fidelity where you are in your design journey. And this is a guy who's, that's his remit and his MO is all about prototyping, and he'll share some amazing stories. So sign up if you haven't already. That'll be at Lassie's office next month. So yeah, have a look out for that one. While we're on our meetup, Sylvia, have you got anything in mind for CCX next month?
So far with Sylvia, CCX, and the videos and apologies. Yes, we're going to have a meetup next month, 21st. We're going to have 2 speakers, so details to be confirmed and venue to be confirmed soon.
Suspense.
Yeah, keep an eye out. Stay tuned in on the meetup.
Is it talk about design and stuff?
Yes.
And Adam, EUX, what's on the agenda for EUX?
Yes, good question. So EUX Canberra is next week, so that should be really cool. So if you're in Canberra, come along to the Canberra Innovation.
Go Canberra.
And then we've got EUX SID on the 25th of March. Speaker to be confirmed. All right, amazing.
Okay, so next, we're going to do this.
Introducing our speakers.
Yes.
Oh,
Before we do that,
this is going to be design stuff, isn't it?
it's going to be we're going to go back to who's done economics at school out of curiosity. Some of you guys might know some of the environments. So just want to give a bit of context for today's talk and today's speakers. This is how we do design. It's all fair design. Now we're going to talk about economics. But those in economics who've done economics will know that there's sort of a map. You might map for economics. You might have your consumers on one side. You have your firms. I hate whiteboard markers when they don't work. Just I'll put a big C for consumers. You might have your businesses or your firms. And obviously you have all your leakages. And part of this is your financial institutions. Now they play multiple roles, but they're also in their own right firms. Now, some of our topics today will be quite real, because we're going to talk about obviously family abuse and domestic violence. So please be mindful of where you're at. If you need some help and support, please take the time to look after your own well-being and look for get the support that you need. There'll be people around if you need to have a chat. But just in the context of today, we're going to talk a lot about what happens inside this box, because not everything's perfect inside that consumer box. And sometimes some of these firms and businesses need to actually act in support of people who need help. Now, in the context of linking what Catherine's going to talk about with what Emma's going to talk about, when we think about things like design to disrupt, and we'll talk more about that later, that's having systemic impacts to how we design products to protect the people who need to be protected. For that to actually happen, we need to influence design teams in these financial intermediaries, banks and insurance companies and whatnot, and the firms to put those design best practices in place. That's only going to happen when you've got design leadership in this box here. And that's where Emma comes in with her experience on how you influence and get best practice design and leading design to build out a better ecosystem. And Catherine's going to talk a lot about having an impact in that systemic change and getting these firms to actually start adopting some best practices. So we've intentionally put these two together to talk about some really interesting and tough topics, but at the same time, whilst we're talking about tough topics, we want to celebrate what these great women have achieved in the ecosystem. Later on, we'll also have another great design leader up from Canberra, Kate Ingram, who we have a conversation with these two fantastic ladies. And that's sort of a bit of an overview. So we'll get into procedures and economics 101s.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce Emma, and I'm so excited that she's come all the way from Brisbane to join us tonight. I don't get to see enough of Emma. We've worked together over the years. And Emma is a true design leader. She's a designer at heart. And I think from a very early time in her career, there's been one thing that she's wanted to design. This is a goal, which is to redesign the leadership table, the boardroom table. She wanted two things at that table. She wanted women at the leadership table. And let's face it, don't we all want diversity in leadership? Don't we truly believe that leaders that bring diverse perspectives that are representative of the society that they serve are going to make better decisions? So that was one thing, but there was something else she wanted to see at that leadership table. and that was design. Whew. She wanted to see designers in leadership because she knew that having designers as leaders would enable businesses to be more innovative, because design is a real catalyst for change and innovation. So we're still not there yet.
No, we're not
really.
We're still on the journey.
So we work together, and like we work together at Thoughtworks, and we have had women and designers now in the highest level of leadership in our company, but it took decades to get there. And I remember sitting on leadership like town halls, where the CEO and the CTO are talking about their strategic plans, and in a company of over 10,000 people, Emma would be the one on a Zoom call who would politely put her hand up and ask the challenging questions. Why are there no women in the senior leadership team, in the global team, or in any of the country teams? She would ask those questions. And that was a few years ago now, and we're getting there. Like, we do have women and designers in those positions, but it's still an ongoing challenge. So I think this was probably one of the reasons why you took time to actually research the challenge of design maturity in organisations, and you interviewed a whole bunch of leaders or design leaders and put your research into a book, in 2 books. So Emma's got some of those books here tonight. So the first one was Designed Up, a designer's guide to how to lead from the inside. And the second book, and that one was specifically about tech, which is pretty much a male-dominated industry up until recently. So, and the sequel, Shaping a Designed Up Organisation. So there's one of those books is up for a prize tonight. So she's also a great mentor of young designers. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for the great introduction. Kate and I haven't seen each other very well. We see each other a lot on Zoom and text messages. So it was really great to be able to fly down for this tonight. So I'm going to start off with this, which a lot of you have probably seen. So it's been proven, and this was quite a while ago, that companies who have design at the core outperform those that don't by 290%. I use this a lot when I'm talking to execs to kind of really drive that home to them. But what happens in a lot of companies, and we would have seen this, is so many organisations strive for that, innovative, connected, or personalised experiences, and they always talk a good talk about being customer obsessed, and we've probably been in a lot of those meetings where we're customer obsessed, yet without being diverse in their thinking and embedding and amplifying design and the influence of design, like those bold visions just end up being buzzwords. And so those promises that they have, end up being kind of quite hollow promises, and we've all seen how they skew a lot of data, and it's just there to dress to impress the board. So, for example, I know a company who would only bring in customers who had good things to say about their product, because if they showed the true story, then people would not get their bonuses. And that's why they always skewed the data. So the execs were like, yeah, our customers will love our product, even though a lot of customers didn't, and that was just because bonuses were released. What really needs to change is actually how the bonus structure works, so that it's not actually, they're not skewing the data. Then they can actually build better products and better experiences for their customers. So Marriott Hotel, quite a few years ago, this was in 2015, some of you may have heard this story. So they installed all these automatic soap dispensers, and they had a team of people built these soap dispensers, sold them out to all these different organisations. And it wasn't until a lady with darker skin was staying at the Marriott Hotel, went to use the soap dispenser, it didn't work. It didn't work because it didn't recognise her skin tone. So therefore, a hotel like the Marriott, who has all sorts of different customers who go there and installed soap dispensers that didn't work. And it's because they didn't have a diverse team. They didn't test it on, a diverse team. And that's where you really need to be able to go out and then test it on different people, because all sorts of people are going to use this product. But then, just to tie in with the whole International Women's Day, if we look at this, so this is a mammogram machine, for those who have not had the experience of going to have one. The mammogram was actually, the whole machine that they used was actually designed by two men back in the day. Hadn't changed much. Was the most horrible experience. It was clunky to use. The metal plates on your skin, squashing your body parts, so it could do all the scans. So GE decided they were going to take a different approach when they wanted to actually reinvent this whole machine. They actually got a team of women together to redesign how this would work. So it was a team of women who designed a machine that was actually better suited for women's bodies. Still not the most comfortable thing for those who've been through it, but still better than what it was before. And that's because they took a different approach. They got the right people in to actually design it, because they got the people who were going to be using this and experience it to actually design the experience. So that's just a really great example of how some of these companies thought a bit differently to create the right product for the people who are going to use it. So then, if we then go and look at Nationwide Bank, so Nationwide Bank, they were rolling out self-service machines. We've seen this happen a lot in companies. They want to roll out self-service machines because they want people to turn self-serve, and they will just put lots and lots of money into this. But what happened was the design team came in, and there was a design initiative, and they discovered that some segments, as we all know, some people just want to speak to a human. And it's knowing at what moments those people need to speak to a human that they need to change things. And that's when the service design comes in, and you need to then kind of match with that. So what happened then was the customer and business benefit was then put forward. So the design recommendation was, well, why don't we just curb investment on some of these self-service features? And the business benefit of that is that it's actually going to reduce wasteful spending, so that's then eliminated. And of course, businesses don't want to waste money. So then tying the design recommendation back to the business. But then that also impacts the customer. So then the customer can still access those human interactions when they need it in the moments that matter. That then brings me on to what we need to do in design to then get that seat at the table. And probably a lot of you have done this in your organisations. So what we need to do as designers is then start speaking the business speak, because when you're a designer in your design team, you're doing the thing with design, but as you get further up the ladder, your language changes. It goes from design, and customer to actually this is the business benefit. So you have to then speak the business language. Okay, so what we're actually trying to do is when you're talking about design and the impact of design, you also need to understand what is the business trying to achieve. So the business is either trying to reduce costs or remove waste, we've seen that a lot in the industry, increase revenue, because at the end of the day, if the company doesn't make money, we don't get paid. So, and then there's no business left. And then they'll also be looking at increasing existing customer business. So how can we use our existing customers and how can we create better experiences for them and charge them for them? And increase market share as well, or increase the shareholder value. Now, businesses won't be working in all of these at the same time because that's too much, so they will be picking at one or two. So what's really important is when you're talking about design and the value of design is understanding where the business is and what the business driver is for that particular point in time. And as we all know, it changes every year within organisations. Hopefully. Yes. So then that brings me on to the STAR model. So the STAR model, this is actually created, I think it was back in the 60s, but this is actually how a lot of companies today are still set up. This is, especially the big corporations, this is the structure of them, and it hasn't really changed that much unless you're kind of some of the startups where you're trying to go with more the flat structure. But so inside an organisation, you've got the strategy, then you've got the structure of the organisation. So this is that, the power, the scale, the information, how the information's flowing, the organisational roles. And then you've got the business process, so, the data, the workflows, the information. Reward systems as well, so the motivation, the compensation that you're giving to people, so you've got that reward system. And then you've got the people, so the skills of the people inside the organisation, what's their mindset, behaviours and engagement. So those are all of the different, that's what makes up an organisation when we break it down. And a lot of people think that design just works in one area. Sometimes they think that design just makes things pretty, which I still hear sometimes. Sometimes I think design just works in product, or some organisations who are more mature will actually think about service design and actually how design can impact everything across an organisation. So understanding this can then help you then change your language when you're speaking to people. So because design can actually help out in all these areas. So with the strategy, the goals and the objectives need to include the customer and the employees, because we don't just want to create great experiences for the end customer. The employees also need to have a great experience, because when they're joining an organisation, they're generally joining it because they've been sold on the brand promise of that organisation, and they want to go and work for that company because it sounds really great. But then if they get inside the company and it doesn't live up to the brand and it doesn't live up to the promise, then they'll be sort of disengaged. So therefore we need to think about the employee and the customer experience. And then if we look at structure as well, so the structure needs to allow for that cross-functional teams. And we've all seen this, I'm sure all the companies worked in, you have those silos, and that prevents things from working together, prevents design, tech and product from working together. So this is when the structure needs to allow for that cross-pollination of ideas and for then design to be driven through the organisation. And then also data. So a lot of people think that designers don't need to work in this area, but the workflows also need to be considered as well, and the impact that has on humans, which is where that systems thinking and employee experience comes in. And some of the work I was doing a couple of years ago was actually, they wanted to bring AI, I know it's a big topic at the moment, they wanted to bring that into one particular part of the business to help developers create release notes much quicker. So I was then asked if I could lead that team, and I said, well, it's all very well as solving this problem, but what is actually the overall problem we're trying to solve? And it turned out that the developers were spending a very long time, sometimes up to a sprint writing release notes. And so it was okay for us to solve this problem with us using AI to create release notes much quicker. But those will then get handed to another team. And that other team, who are then taking those release notes, they then rework it in their language. They're then passing it to the ops team, who are then reworking it so they can make it more customer focused. So I said, if we solve it here, we're still going to have this knock-on impact further down the line. So what we need to do is think about what all those three teams need, so we can actually create the right agents who can create the release notes that then works for all three teams, which then at the end of the day, the customer gets the thing they need at the end to help them with the product. So it's about thinking about the knock-on impact of where you're working. And then with the employee experience as well, so design also plays a role here as well. So we've all been through interview processes where you have a good and a bad experience with the interview process and then the onboarding. So that's when design can also help with that as well, to make it a great experience. And then of course the skills. So you need to map out those journeys for the recurring and the onboarding processes. So design can work across all of these different areas. We just need to make sure we're articulating design and how it can help in these different areas to the right people in the business. And as Heidi said, design is actually about showing how you help the company either make money or save money, because at the end of the day, that's the whole objective of a lot of these organisations. So how do we actually do this? So I thought we'd start off with design maturity in delivery, because that's where a lot of people work and that's where a lot of the focus is, and then we'll go on to how we're actually going to scale that. So what I did when I was at PEXA is I looked at how we were going to solve that. So design thinking, I know this is design thinking meter, it has a place, but my problem with this design, which we've all used a million times, is that this doesn't really articulate and show actually how design works. And what's been great with this is it's actually helped organisations who like processes. It's helped them understand how design works in the most simplest form. But we all know that design is very messy and it's not actually like that. It's not from start to finish and it's done. So So it has helped us get a much better seat at the table, but what it's also caused is some organisations think that it's just literally that step process and it's done, and then if it doesn't work, they come back to say, okay, it hasn't worked. So what we need to do is then take this and get organisations to understand it's not as simple as that. A lot of companies are getting there, but I think the problem with this is it made it too simple. But it helped us get into the organisations, so it helped us get that voice. So what I did at PEXA when I first joined is I needed to understand what was going on with the design team, what was working and not working. So I put together this smart design standards. So we put this in a mirror board, and this was everything across delivery to understand what was working, what wasn't working. And then, so some of these things that I captured was, design and strategy. Is design involved in those strategy decisions? And do we have continuous feedback loops across delivery? Are UX, tech, and product and business working collaboratively together? So I actually sent this out across the part of the business I was working in. So that went to over 100 people, and it was across 9 different squads to then capture that information. And what that did is I was then able to gather some really great insights. So I had over 400 comments across the team. This is from developers to business analysts and up to exec. So I gathered all of those insights to understand what was working, but what wasn't working. So you also need to understand the positives, because you don't want to move those, but also what the negatives are. And then from that, I then put together a design strategy. Okay, these are the main problems. How are we going to go and fix those? And then I called out 6 specific areas to focus on for the next 12 months. So we had 6 items, and these became our OKRs. And the results of that is, I won't go through all of these, is we then created a North Star for International. So this is something that had been lacking for the 3 years, so created a North Star. And then I put together a business case for us to actually have a design system and build a design system, and explain to them that a design system is not something that's just in Figma. And it's actually something coded components. That was actually it was an interesting conversation, because when I joined, I was told there was a design system. I then had to explain to the GM of the product that there wasn't a design system, and what he'd been told was that the design system was actually a mess in Figma. And then I had to explain to him that I needed lots of money to then build. So anyway, but it was a really, really good exercise. So what we did to then get that over the line was then put together a business case of this is how many hours we're going to save, this is how much money we're going to save if you invest this. And they removed an awful lot of the red tape as well with testing, especially with testing with customers in the UK. We've got GDPR things to consider. So these are just some of the results that came out of that. Because we haven't got much time, I'm not going to go into all those details. So then once you've got all of that, so you've got things humming, everything's working really well across delivery, design are involved in the right conversations, and tech and the business are there, and you've got things working really well. We then need to then amplify that. We need to grow that out from the organisation and mature it. So one of the things that I did through years of working with various clients at ThoughtWorks is I noticed that I was working with clients who had really poor design maturity, and then those who had really high design maturity. So Diana Adorno, so she's an awesome researcher. So we worked together in collaboration on this, because what I noticed is that a lot of the design maturity ladders out there, they told you, these are the 5 steps, but it didn't tell you how you got there, and it didn't tell you what they actually were. So it just said this is what it looks like, which I didn't think was very helpful to help people get from level 1 to level 4. So we put these together as our overall, and then from that we then broke that down into what works across an organisation. So let's look at these maturity models. So we had 8 maturity dimensions. So this is around, again, going back to that, the STAR model with business. So how are the teams and the organisation structure work? What are the design skills? How does research work across the organisation? What metrics we're using to make sure that it's successful? And then connection to the business strategy. How is that working? The business impact, the customer experience, and the employee experience. So we put all of these together. And then on top of that, we then came up with these different steps. So from level 1, which is low mature design maturity, to level 6. And we did that for 8, all of those different areas across the organisation. And then what I did is I went out and I asked businesses that I was working with to then map where they actually felt that they sat. So in here, it tells you what that should look like inside the organisation, and then it has a quote around what you're actually seeing inside the organisation to give people a bit more context. So I've used this quite a bit to kind of understand where people are with their maturity. So once you've got your maturity, you can then say, well, actually, the majority say that we're, teams and organisation structure is actually a level 2. And then the connection to the business, well, that's a level 1. But you can't move all of these at the same time. So then you need to pick which ones you want to move the needle on. And what's helpful with this is that when you put it all together, is you won't be a level 3 for everything because you're at different levels of maturity across the organisation. So it gives you a good understanding of what's working and what's not. And then you can then say, well, actually, we want to focus on these 4 areas for the next 12 months. And then you put a plan together for that. So this is where you want to go, and then this helps then form your strategy. So I know there's a lot in here, it's all in my books. So if you bring all that together, so design needs to be that strategic partner inside organisations, so talking the business language. And your designers need to be intentionally embedded, and the design practices need to be there as well. But then we need to then mature that practices across the organisation. So what I want you to go away with tonight is think about how does design work in your organisation? What's the one thing you can do to actually mature it? And if you want to get one of my books, you can scan that, also have some for sale. And this one, I've just finished the audio book on, you can prefer that. The other one, I'll do the audio book later in the year. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Emma. It was amazing. If I draw some parallels to even some of my own experiences in human development, you look at different lines of intelligence, and you think about emotional intelligence, mental intelligence, somatic intelligence of the body. The maturity model for me is you look at what's holding you back. And normally your lowest maturity ranking is what actually holds you back. So it gives you a nice direction on what to look like in your design practice and what collectively we need to work towards. So it's really great to see those sorts of practices come to the fore. And great talk. Really loved it. So another round of applause. So our next speaker is Catherine Fitzpatrick. Before I introduce Catherine, I want to talk about a little bit about why this is really important to me as a human being. So as I grew up, my stepfather, my mum remarried after divorce, and my stepfather was actually very abusive. In the context of Catherine's work, you'll hear a lot of examples of how perpetrators of domestic violence and family abuse will use products manufactured by organisations as a form of a weapon. They'll weaponise these products. If I talk about my experience growing up, particularly for my mum never had a bank account. She never had a bank account in her name. She had permission to use my stepfather's bank account. She had permission to do certain things. So you can sort of see how that dominance and that overbearing nature of certain men in some cases, not always men that are perpetrators of abuse and violence, but more often than not, statistically it is. But how we design things that actually are built in a way that there's safety built into those. Catherine's done some amazing work, and even I work in the banking industry. I urge everybody to download Design to Disrupt, have a look at it. There's a couple of papers focusing on financial services like banks and insurance companies, and Catherine's looking at utilities and telcos and how all these big companies can come to the table and actually design better products to create that safety by design. So powerful. I would walk into product managers and give them Design to Disrupt and say, we want to build this into our design practices and just make that one of the core tenets of what we need to do when we're coming up with new products. Because it's not, some of these design decisions are not easy. because it's sometimes contextually different. Like we might have controls around a joint account, for example. In one scenario, you might have a rule saying you can't pull out all the money in one go, because sometimes the perpetrators will just go and take all the money, so the victim doesn't have access to the money. But if it's the victim that needs the money, then they need, that's their lifeline to get out of the situation. So you can see there's some tension within the design process. So how do you solve for that level of complexity? So as we sort of hold on to those really difficult moments and those challenges, I really want to welcome Catherine to the stage and share some of her experiences.
Thanks, Lucas. It's really hard to tell people when you've grown up in an environment like that, so and I'm sure that because domestic abuse is something that impacts on so many people in our society, there are probably people in the room who have had experience of violence and control and abuse. I'm here for you. I'm also here for people who've grown up in those environments, who have witnessed it, who have friends and family who feel it now. And I'm also here for the people who use violence, because I know that you can change and that you probably don't want to do that. So I want to talk today. Can you hear me, by the way? I realise I'm a very soft speaker. Sorry. So I want to talk today about how safety isn't accidental, it's designed. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you. But if we don't design for safety, our designs will be misused and weaponised, and they will be misused and exploited to cause harm. I want to talk to you about how I came to this. So I'm a former bank executive. Everyone loves banks, I know that. I worked running the complaints team at CommBank during the Royal Commission and during the prudential review into Commonwealth Bank. So I worked at a time that particularly everyone really hated us, and my team was supporting those customers who were having a lot of trouble. But I'm also the architect of Commonwealth Bank's domestic and family violence strategy from about 11 years ago. After the Royal Commission, I had the privilege of setting up a small team that was supporting customers experiencing domestic and family violence and also problem gambling. When I went to visit them, one of them showed me in the account of a woman that we were helping who had fled her ex-husband these messages in her bank account. And they were 1 cent at a time, messages from her ex-husband, which gradually got into abusive messages. These were the kinds of messages that that team told me that they saw were in the accounts of women that we were supporting every day. And it was mainly women, because that's what the statistics showed. We didn't know that this was happening in the payment descriptions. I'm a massive fan of e-payments. When it first came out and you could send money to somebody just using their phone number, I was obsessed and kept showing everybody my phone. Did you know you could do this? Amazing. I would write to my kids, here's some more money. And I would say thanks for dinner and all of those sorts of things. We had no idea that this was being sent through our platform. And when we found it, I had a team of data scientists and I said to them, is this a thing? And they said, well, take a look. And so they analysed 11 million transactions in a 3-month period. And what we found is particularly young people were using bank accounts as a messaging service. We had about 24,000 people who were sending messages that probably shouldn't be in your bank account, transferring rent and saying, midget porn was one of the ones that I read. Those sorts of things shouldn't be in your bank account, right? Because you can see it, but we weren't looking. But also what we found in that period was 8,000 really serious messages like this. I read one that was a string of 900 messages, 1 cent at a time, sent in rapid succession, like it was over a couple of days, including, I want to kill you, I'm out the front, I want to kill them all. So we said, oh my God, In fact, when the team showed me the data, I just burst into tears and couldn't believe that this was happening. I didn't expect to see a word cloud like this in a bank. It was very different from when I worked in construction, the kind of ways that people interacted with each other. But I was very lucky that I had this incredible team of scientists who could see the patterns, and they were patterns that we had never seen before. The digital team, the team that had designed the payment system and the way that that platform had worked, didn't anticipate that people would send these kinds of messages. The digital team had seen swear words, language that you shouldn't use in a bank account, but they didn't know the pattern, so we were very lucky to have been able to work that out. I took the data with one of my colleagues to the e-safety commissioner, as well as a range of other people, and said, here's what we found. Oh my God, what should we do about it? And the e-safety commissioner said, you should look at safety by design. In fact, they had heard about people sending messages through bank accounts. And when we talked to the women's safety sector, they had heard about it. We looked at our complaints, only one customer had ever complained to us about it. No one had told us this was happening. And when Julia McGrath said, look at safety by design, we then said, what is that? And it was a process that she had developed, or a framework that the e-safety commissioner had developed with the tech sector in 2018, 2019, so the same time as we found the messages, which said that there are three principles. Platforms should be safe for people who use them. We need to have accountability and transparency from those platforms. It shouldn't be up to the user to make sure that they were safe. It was actually the accountability of those platforms. So we took that away and said, well, what would that look like if we were to look at this problem that's happening in our bank accounts under our noses? And we mapped 51 potential design interventions, starting from could we block the message, right through to how do we support someone who's receiving this. We then went to people who work in the sector, in the women's safety sector. We also went to consumer advocates, and we went to people with lived experience and said, what would make the most difference? And we debated internally, do we even have a role to play here? Because isn't this just two people and messages between two people? Is this something that a bank should move on? I was really delighted when they said, yes, it's our platform and we want it to be safe. We didn't design it for this. So we then took those 51 interventions and then we then mapped them against the safety by design framework and decided the first thing we needed to do was block the words, but we didn't want to block the money. So part of the first thing we did was create this big data dictionary. I ended up being chief censor, reading lots of things like Urban Dictionary to try and understand what the hell people were saying. And we came up with a massive data dictionary. And we then said, those words you cannot send, and we block them in real time and you get one of these that comes up. So that you then, it doesn't stop the money, but it stops you from sending the language. Obviously, that is not going to stop everybody from sending those kinds of messages. People can come up with all different ways to be awful to each other. And also, we know we didn't have emojis at that point, but emojis are being used. And I know from the work I've done with survivor advocates, you know, if he's threatened to burn the house down with you in it and sends you an emoji of a flag, that is a very different meaning than somebody who's just said, I love you and sent you a flame or whatever. So we started off with just blocking the language. We then took our data analysis and gave it to every other bank in Australia and said, we found this, maybe you've got it too. We showed them how we did it and they had a look. I was in very interesting conversations across the industry about should we all move on it, and we all decided to. So I'm really proud actually that banks who we don't always love actually took this one seriously and said we would do something. So since 2019, banks between them have blocked more than 1 million messages in real time and asked people to change the language. That is from more than 300,000 customers who have sent that kind of language. If you're going to write a message in a bank transaction description, banks are watching. If you remember that on your statements, you might need them to go and show somebody as you get a rental or something like that. People don't need to see this kind of communication, and nor should a bank account be used to send abuse. There's also Combank, where I used to work. They have developed some code which is now published on GitHub, and it's freely available for any bank to detect the patterns. So what we knew is we couldn't block all the words, but we knew that there were patterns of low value transactions, high volume, with the abusive messages in it. So they detect that using artificial intelligence and machine learning, and have now released that so that every bank in the world can use it. And they also put a risk score on it. So every year they detect about 1,500 really, really serious threats by using that. There's a lot of banter in there as well, so it was really making sure that they knew which one of the ones that they really needed to dive into. Between them, when I did my first piece of research in 2022, we found that banks had sent between them more than 3,000 warning letters to customers who are sending these kinds of messages saying, we can see you, you need to stop. If you don't stop, you'll be suspended or we'll close your account. And what's been fascinating out of those letters is more than 90% of the people who get one of those letters stop sending the abuse through the bank accounts. They may be abusing in other ways, and no one has looked at whether that's happening, but we were able to cut off one form of really serious psychological manipulation and control for victim survivors, and make it really clear to perpetrators that you can't do this. Banks have also worked through the FinTel Alliance, which is an alliance of AUSTRAC, which is the financial crimes regulator, and banks and others, to set up what's called a suspicious matters code. Now, all banks have got an obligation to report money laundering and other financial crime to the regulator. They developed a new code that was specifically for what we could see in the transaction descriptions. And that means that banks are monitoring what's being written in there and now sending intelligence reports. New South Wales Government said that they had accessed 380 intelligence reports that were being monitored to AUSTRAC, and as a result of that had made arrests, not just for domestic abuse, but also for outlaw motorcycle gangs, drug dealers, child sex abusers, because they were able to triangulate some of the intelligence that banks are now providing. In fact, there's been arrests and there's been prosecutions, and the first person who was jailed in New South Wales under new coercive control legislation was actually convicted, and the banking transactions was one of the ways that he was threatening and stalking and surveilling his former partner. I tell you that story because that's how I came to safety by design. And once you see the harm that is being inadvertently enabled by the products and services that you are designing, you can't unsee it. And then you have to make a choice. Am I going to do something about it or not? So in 2022, I had left banking and I was appointed as Australia's first Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner. I was appointed by the Morrison government, and I hadn't started, and after the change of government, the Albanese government revoked my appointment. So I went, fuck me, what am I going to do now? Excuse my French. Single bum, Sydney mortgage, very hard. And I wrote this paper called Designed to Disrupt because I couldn't get out of my head, how do we, if we know that the ways that we had intervened in domestic abuse through the payment system? What if I looked at financial abuse and all the products in banking that are being misused and weaponised for financial abuse? And financial abuse is where someone tries to control you through your access to money. So just some of the examples that Lucas gave. And I did research with people with lived experience. I used a lot of my own, what I had seen inside banks, but I talked to people in the sector, and I mapped, I basically made the case and said, product by product in banking, here are the ways they are being misused. Therefore, these are the things you could do to design them differently. We were just coming out of COVID in 2022, and we had started seeing this exponential rise in scams. So we were already starting to put more friction into the system to stop people from being scammed. And a lot of those things that you are thinking about for fraud and scams are things that you can apply to help people experiencing domestic and financial abuse. Since then, I've also written a paper on general insurance, and looking at the ways that policies and insurance products are being weaponised. Things like the most common there are where a policy might be changed or cancelled, where the co-insured doesn't know, so they're being left without insurance. One woman told me about she didn't know that her insurance policy on the house had been cancelled by her ex-partner until he threatened to burn the house down with her and the children in it. And that's because it was really easy to just do that online. But if there had been friction in the system, she might have been notified, and now insurers are starting to introduce those policies because of that paper. I've worked on a paper on energy and water. I was commissioned by a regulator in Victoria to do that, which also looks at the weaponisation there. It's primarily racking up debt in somebody else's name, refusing to pay the bills. And because of the way that they're structured legally, it's very hard for someone to rebuild and to disentangle. But also, any service where you are able to log onto your account online, particularly if it's a joint account, is open to being misused to track and surveil a victim survivor. And then if it's joint accounts as well, we see a lot of privacy breaches where someone who has fled can't change their new address without the other person being notified. So any of you that have got joint accounts, online billing or any online services, please do think about this. The next paper is telco. I was really hoping it would have been launched by now, but haven't finished it, but that is coming. And that's going to really look also at the intersection between telecommunications and tech, because it's really hard to disentangle both of them. So the question I would ask you as you are designing is, are your products and services safe for people who are in unsafe situations? This needs to be the new way we think about design, and it needs to be our new form of safety culture, in my view. I developed a framework called Financial Safety by Design. I worked with the eSafety Commission to make sure it's true to what they have done. It basically is 3 steps, of course, like any framework, that you need to understand what products can and will and are being used as weapons. Then once you understand that, you can then design them for safety. So put the controls in, change the design. And then the third and final point, which I just want to talk a little bit about, is communicating acceptable behaviour. So social media has terms which say you've got to behave like this in our community. We can debate whether social media companies are enforcing that or not with their trust and safety people. In fact, they wound it back a lot. Sorry if any of you work there, but I'm very happy to have that conversation. The reason I made this recommendation and said that everyone should, I'll keep talking while we try and sort it out. So the reason I made this recommendation is because we know that that condoning of violence and jokes and those sorts of things can lead to gender-based violence. That is one of the drivers when we condone behaviours. But if we say together, and all of us say, actually, that's not on, we know that we can change the outcome and we can change our culture. It happened after September 11, when we all knew we couldn't joke about terrorism and get on a plane. It happens at sports games where we know that you can't abuse the umpire and expect to stay at the game. So my recommendation here was everyone should put in their terms and conditions with customers. If you misuse our products for financial abuse, there'll be consequences. And that's because we don't condone it. So as a result of that, no organisations had done that in Australia, in fact globally, when I made that recommendation. But after the first year of advocacy, pretty serious advocacy, 13 banks had agreed to do that and had introduced those terms. And then in 2024, I launched a campaign. I kept saying to them, no one reads your terms and conditions, you have to tell everybody. This is about changing culture. It's not about closing accounts. So I launched a campaign called Respect and Protect, which is to encourage more organisations to introduce those terms. As of today, there's 79 companies in Australia or brands in Australia that have those terms. Between them, they serve more than 20 million customers and they're across about 12 sectors. So if you're in any of your organisations, please encourage them. I've got a website. There's some of the brands. I haven't updated that actually. I think I was about 60 at that point. But you can go onto, thank you. You can go onto the Respect and Protect website, and I have a page which lists all the terms. So it's a page that lots of lawyers read while they decide what to do. So the reason, what I think is really interesting, we did some research at the beginning of last year, which we published at the beginning of last year, which shows that 96% of Australians agree that companies should aim to protect their customers from financial abuse. 3 in 4 want these protections from the companies that they deal with. And 23% of customers would definitely switch to get these new terms. About another 40% said that they might switch, but we know switching, but it's a little bit of a hard one. So, yes. Last week I launched, I vibe coded, and I made this app, so I'm very proud of it. I launched this app, which allows everybody, every consumer, to check the fine print of about 550 brands in there. It checks it against the database that I have, so there's 78 companies or brands. You can look them up and say thanks to a provider for introducing those terms, or you can nominate them to act. As of today, there's about 500 brands that have either got a thanks or are nominated to act. I've been on a bit of a mission. Please do it yourself. Please download it. It's so easy. It takes you 2 seconds. I want to get 10,000 people doing this. Tell everyone you know, because I want those terms to be a standard consumer protection, because it isn't about closing accounts, it's about changing behaviour. And none of us designed our products and services to be misused. Well, there are some that wanted to. The final thing I would say, and I guess it bookends what I started with, is in the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, it has a quote from victim survivors, and one of the things they say is it's a really uncomfortable conversation, but they want us to all step into that discomfort, and stopping their suffering depends on all of us doing something differently. So I'd really encourage you to think about safety as an innovation and what we can do to help that. Thank you.
I'm deeply grateful for what you've done, again, systemically, because it is a big problem. And the fact that people are watching and acting is such a big thing. Again, talking about my experiences, and abusers will often try and ostracize and push people away. And you can see when you're on the inner circle that you'll see it happening, and you'll see people like literally shy away. They don't know what to do. So the more we can get the courage to step in and act, the more people will be safe. The more we stop the systemic next generation suffering from what happens next. Because my brother and my sister have had very difficult lives. I feel very grateful for the life I've had because I've come through a journey. But my brother and my sister still live some of that journey because of what's happened. So it's not just the victim today, it's also the victims tomorrow. So that when we see these systemic practices put in place, they have a longer lasting impact, not just for today, but for tomorrow. So this is something that I'm really, really passionate about. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank you also, Emma, because I think we need enterprises to be able to take these things and deliver that greatness at scale. And as for those that are working design, these are perspectives we need to take into how we design our products and services. Because we don't think about these things. And I work in service design, I'm all about this perspective, that perspective, that perspective. How do you mix all this together? How do you get to a point of alignment? So how do the people that we don't see, how do you give them a seat at the table to work a way forward where we can also be safe and think about their future together? And we're having these amazing women that actually show us the pathway to do that. So really on par with International Women's Day, balancing the scales. Both you amazing ladies doing some really, really great work. So I really thank you. And feel free to connect with Catherine.
I didn't know you can just pull out a QR code from the back there on anyway.
So, and if you want to catch up later, we'll go to the Republic next door and we'll continue the conversation. Especially if you want to have a debate with Catherine, because she's happy to have that debate about social media, obviously. Now I want to
Take it down now.
Nice.
You're going to let Kate's photograph a second.
So, I'm going to let you in on the little CK.
Everyone see Kate as I go through? There. I see Kate. Thank you. Sorry, Lucas. Just keeping Kate up there for a moment. Keep going. That's fine. No, okay. Right.
Now I'm going to let you in on the secret. Today's all about me. I'm the man in the room, I'm the extrovert, I have that urgency, I'm passionate. But in that space where I like to, I'm doing it for good in my context. Sometimes as men with masculine energy, when you're trying to impose yourself, we take away the space for others to come in and shine. So at this point in time in the evening, it's my turn to move out of the way. And I really want to introduce another amazing design leader, Kate, who will be running and facilitating a panel. So Kate is a massive, actually I should say, ambassador for design. She's a good design of Australia ambassador. She runs the design practice for government in KPMG, and I'm going to explain it better than me, but I feel really privileged to know Kate in the ecosystem. She does so much for design in the ecosystem, so really privileged to have Kate run the panel. As a male who has that urgency and wants to just fix the world or wants wrapped up in my own ego, and for those that have that masculine energy, ask yourself, what can you do to step out of the way? Because I'm the worst offender, and I'll admit I'm the worst offender.
Wave your arms. That's it. That's it.
Oh, that's
So, what can you do if you have, even if you're female and you have that masculine energy you're opposed to, what can we all do to make space for those to step into so they can shine as well? So with that, I'm going to fuck off. Get out of the way of the wind in the room.
So I'll just caveat that what we're going to do is I've got a couple of prepared question areas, but it's okay. Well, I don't think Adam's going to kick us out. You might give me the nod, but we will go to some live mics, without the mic, you most have to shout if you've got some questions in the audience. But I just wanted to sort of touch on the two talks, and I think yes, thank you, I am from Canberra, which means 90% of my work these days is very government-based, but I come from a very private sector background in design and creative products and everything. And I love the fact that these talks, like Emma's room, talking around the business value of design, which I'm constantly having to try and explain to some businesses, it's and then sometimes government, it's I feel, being a bit biased here, a little bit more of an extra challenge when we're trying to talk. And I will say, when I talk to some of my government clients, I'm not even using the word design, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room, whether it's council, New South Wales, or we're in New South Wales, but it's state, territory government level, it's federal government level, we might feel the same. So just based off your different experiences, and you gave us some examples, where do you feel, and I know that everyone in this room, either I'm hoping we've got a few designers here, or at least people that are championing design, we might have different design disciplines in the room, but also probably different levels in our organisations. I used to always think I'd be the behind the scenes designer, not doing much, kind of worked up into a bit of a leadership level. So with that lens, where do you think some organisations, and we'll have a private and public sector example if you can, where you feel like the design concept is struggling, and do you have some advice for people at all levels, whether they're designers or champions of design, to help explain the value of design at all levels?
Well, I guess it all depends on the organisation and where they are in their maturity.
So buy the book and understand maturity first.
So it could be something as simple as, for example, I was working with a client many years ago. They had 50% market share in Australia, but it was like a lot of us are dealing with this designs. It's a legacy system, and they knew they needed to reinvent that because there's only so long that tech can kind of be held together with sticky tape. So I went in there as a principal to kind of oversee how things are going to work, with how we're going to do this, like reimagine this thing and get rid of all the what was there. And one of the problems we had, like a lot of designers have, is we want access to your customers to actually find out, what's going on, what works, what doesn't work, what do we need to change. And they were scared because they didn't want their customers who've been with them for years to suddenly get scared that this new product was going to come in and their old product they've been using for years, completely embedded in their business, was going to be taken away. So I said to him, so I went and spoke to, I think it was the chief, he looked after all, he was the chief customer person. I had a chat with him, he's like, I said, look, I understand this is a really big thing for you, and I understand that you're scared about us being your customers, but can you find me just 5 customers that you've got a really good relationship with, where you can explain to them that we actually need to go and speak to them? So he went away, came back, he said, okay, I've got 5, I'm going to come with you. I said, no, that's fine, you organise it, we'll come with you. And he was just scared because he didn't know what we were going to ask. So of course we went out there. We just wanted to observe how they used the product. And when we were asking, well, why do you do it like that? Why do you move that way? And then after that he goes, now I see what you're doing. Here's the details. You just deal with them directly. So sometimes it's just a case of you just got to take them on the journey and explain why. And then just take them along to the sessions with you so they can see that you're not going to start asking, really bad questions that's going to damage the company.
And evidence tends to prove some really great points, which I know in government, Catherine, sometimes you really need to show the right kind of data. Yeah. We're talking about language too, but with government, I'm particularly interested, like how do you take, I know you've worked a lot in private sector too, but you've done a lot with government. How do you try and get them to understand, like safety by design, building by design?
Yeah, I think, well, it helps that the e-safety commissioner has championed safety by design since the time when she worked in tech, and then has been able to get, implemented in a way, and they're starting to do it more through codes with the tech sector. The government has been really interesting for this conversation. There was, after a particularly horrendous murder here in New South Wales, the Commonwealth Government set up a review on prevention practices, it's called. It's like this really long, awkwardly named report. Basically, they were saying, what else do we need to do to prevent gender-based violence? And I actually was asked to speak to the review committee with the e-safety commissioner about safety by design, and one of their recommendations was government needs to do this. And so the Prime Minister wrote to all the ministers, who also charged their secretaries of their departments to do what's called a systems abuse review. And that is looking at all of the systems that are being misused and recognised. Child support is a really good example of that, where the way the system has been designed and is being manipulated, it's causing women to live in poverty. And I use gendered language because I'm using the majority of victims and perpetrators. But it is being misused and recognised. And government has said, well, actually, our services shouldn't be doing that. What do we need to do to fix it? It's really complex because some of it's from a tax debt, for example, and that can be incurred by someone who engages in business financial abuse, where they might set up their partner to be a director of a company and they have got no idea. The next thing you know, they rack up a massive tax debt, they become bankrupt, and then the partner is left with this massive tax bill that she didn't know anything about. The tax office cannot waive, under policy, can't waive a tax debt. So they're now unpicking all of these things and saying what's wrong from a policy process procedure perspective. And I have done work with the government on developing a safety by design guide. New South Wales government, similarly, I was engaged by the Women's Safety Commissioner to do research with victim survivors, and the sector to look at the weaponisation of Service New South Wales products and services. And so I think there is now an appetite to look. And so what's been missing is that we haven't thought about the other side. We've thought about how do we go hard and fast for the 80% who are in the middle. We've been doing it, we've got laws around accessibility, which is often treated as compliance, but actually we know when you design for the 20%, it actually can have a really fantastic approach for everybody else. So this is just a new tweak, and that's why I say when you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, and look, we're obviously celebrating International Women's Day, but you both talked about inclusivity, and we all know that gender is really just one lens. And I know you were talking earlier about bringing the right people on the journey, and Catherine sort of revealed that there's the kind of people that they might not express exactly what they need, but it's our job as designers, whether we want to call it designers or not, to understand what they really need. And for most of you that are seasoned designers, the desirability, feasibility, viability framework that some of you might know, I struggle with that because we're not always there to delight the experience of the customer. It's just to try and find some real desirability with other things. So I just want to ask about inclusivity. How do you ensure diverse perspectives are genuinely included in the design process? It's a very broad question, but I'm just going to leave that there.
So for me, I always try and bring people from design, tech and product into those conversations, because you're then having a perspective from tech side, product and design, and then with that you're bringing people who've got different backgrounds as well into that. So I always do it that way, as like a minimum. So if you're doing ideation, bring those people in. But also then when you're bringing customers in to test with them or get ideas from them, it's about making sure you're bringing different people in from different backgrounds. Especially with some of the government projects I've worked on as well, making sure that, especially with government service stuff, making sure that you have got people from different backgrounds, different disabilities, because you need to make sure it's accessible. Yeah. But and I had it with a client a while ago who they weren't sure who they needed to test with, and I said, well, look, we need to identify the different cohorts we need to go and speak to, because you've got such a diverse range of customers. So it went from they weren't sure, they were happy with just speaking to a few, to actually no, we want to speak to thousands. So then you've got to kind of put it back in to go, okay, well We can't do all of that, so this is what we can do with the time. But it's just about making sure you've got the right people with different perspectives.
I love that. But you're talking about the right people in the design journey for the team, but also bring the right insights from the customers.
Yes, and that also comes back to the data inside organisations, because a lot of designers think, oh, we just need to go out and do user test stuff. There's so much data inside organisations. You just need to go and find the people who have that data. One of the things that has always surprised me, a lot of companies that are working, call centre data. You can get so much stuff from call centres, but a lot of companies don't actually get that data, and they don't track the data, and they don't store the data. So then when you go to the call centre, you go, actually, I really want some data around what's the most common problem that people call up about. And they're like, well, actually, we don't track it that way. We just track how long the call time is and how long someone's answer, taken to resolve the problem. But I want to understand what the problems are. And a lot of companies don't
track the right.
They don't always get that data. Yeah.
I think similarly, we did a big project for a major bank where we did an equity impact assessment of how a product proves. And so we looked at a particular product and then did a lot of stakeholder engagement and research about how do your cohorts of customers, the people that we represent, because we went to community sector organisations, how are they interacting with this particular product? How do they use it, and what's working for them and what's not? Then we went to the data and looked at customer records of 1.5 million customers on an aggregate basis, and cut it demographically, and which was a little bit hard for some of them. We couldn't do call customers, for example, because I didn't collect that data, but we could do gender and age. And
we'll explain call.
Culturally and linguistically diverse people, so non-English speaking backgrounds, but also other cultural diversity. Yeah. And then we also looked at, for this particular product, we looked at relationship status, which was collected, so we could look at were people married, separated, divorced, widowed, or single. And that was such an interesting triangulation of the data, and we were able to see, by meshing it all together, there's a bunch of people who are not experiencing the product in the way that the majority are. We could also say, if you did these tweaks, that will improve this bit. But also there's a whole underserved market here, and here is your market opportunity. There is a new product here for you. It is a methodology that government uses about doing equity impact assessments, but to my knowledge, the person that I worked with who's done this work internationally, no one's applied it to a product, to a financial product in the same way. So there's a real opportunity to think about that differently.
Just on that, I'm going to ask one more question. You've made the point that sometimes we're not tracking the right data. I also feel that we're no longer, we're in the age of customer, as we always say. I feel like we're beyond the age of data because we've got so much, but we don't know what to do with it. When you work with organisations, what are some of the key things that you're sort of telling organisations or government enterprises? What's more important? You give them some advice on maybe the most trendy, newest things. We sometimes look at customer, satisfaction scores and things like that. What are some of the things that you're seeing in data that matters in all these days? And I know you talked about changing behaviours, which is very hard to track those really big behavioural things. So, what do you think?
I haven't looked into those kind of things, but I did have a very interesting conversation with a client who I was talking to their data team, and they were 100% sold on our customers do not want that project. We've got data to prove they don't want that project. But what it turned out was the customers couldn't find that product because the data was so bad. Because a lot of companies, they have a lot of data, but it's actually the way it's actually been put together. It's really hard to get that data out of the data lake. It depends how they put it together. So sometimes that's what I was saying about sometimes the data is skewed, and they were adamant. And I said, well, actually, we've spoken to customers, and we know that they actually want this product. Because they couldn't find it. It was like, if you actually enabled them to be able to find that product, it was going to create millions of dollars.
So think about the product, but also how they find it all.
Yeah.
I guess it goes to that diversity point and the questions that you are asking. So if you've got people in a room who are not normally in the room, and asking them the questions and listening really hard, which is what you do when you're doing your design work and your design research, but deliberately going for people who you wouldn't ordinarily have in the room and just letting them talk. Then you hear the questions that you might not have thought of, that no one in the organisation has thought of, and it just switches the light bulb.
Something a little bit more personal and reflective. You are both two very, incredible women with the work that you've done. I think, again, just reflecting on, I think I have to do it sometimes, and it's not necessarily a gender thing, but we know that us women sometimes have a little bit of imposter syndrome. I want to know, though, from a perspective of your journey, having now written a couple of books, you've written some papers, you've done sprawling amount of work. What are some vulnerable things you might be able to share with us in terms of your journey to get here, and some inspiration for people that would love to be achieving some of the things that you both are?
They know what I might say. I did share a bit of that vulnerability when I was dubbed as the potential commissioner. That was really, really tough for me because it was public and it was my professional ambition to work in government for more than 2 decades, and to have that taken away was devastating, both professionally and personally and financially. I set up a social enterprise. I earn less than a quarter that I used to earn before, and as a 55-year-old woman looking at retirement whenever, I don't have enough money in super, so that's really hard. How did I get? When I look back at how I became a leader, and I talked about this actually at a conference a couple of weeks ago. I tried to fit into the workplaces that I worked. So I started my career as a journalist in the days of the long lunch, which was awesome. And you'd trip along and write the front page of the newspaper while you're half cut. And then I worked in construction. And after I worked in politics and other places, but I worked in construction, and it was like working in the 80s, even though it was the early 2000s. There was 85% of the workforce were men, and there was a big problem with sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. Also big drinkers. So I puked a lot. Actually, I tried to keep up with everybody, and I vomited a lot in my early career. So much so that one of my colleagues said, "Fitzy, you should write a book, Places I Have Puked." What I learned out of that, though, is I didn't have to keep up. I could just be who I am. And that has stood me in good stead. And I've also gone, it's actually okay for me to be different from the mould. And in fact, that's my secret sauce.
Love it. Thank you. I don't know how
So I might not be drinking with it.
Coming out to public after the water. I guess for me, two things really. So yes, I've written 3 books, but writing is not my forte. So it is not. So when I was at school, so back in the UK, because that's where I grew up and studied. I always knew design was the thing that I was going to do, but for me to get to university, you have to pass your maths and English, and you have to get a certain grade. And I thought English I was going to be okay with, and I knew that the maths was the hard one. So my English tutor basically said to my mum and dad, she's not going to pass her English. So my parents got me a private tutor and helped me, so I got the grade so I could go to uni. And then it was like years later, even my husband, I could speak to him. We've been together since we were 19, and when I used to ask him to proofread stuff, and he's like, "Oh my god, please no." So my husband, his writing is his thing. So he's like, "Oh no, do I really have to look over your grammar and your punctuation?"
So it's not all behind it.
But it was actually when I was speaking to one had my own company in the UK. I was talking to a client about branding, and he was like, "Oh, you really should put this in a book." I was like, "Yeah, it's okay for you. You've written lots of books. You're very good at writing. That's not my thing." And he's like, "No, I'll help you with that." So he was like, "No, this is how you got the structure you do for a book. So it was him encouraging me that got me to write my first book. Is that now I need this information. So that's what started the first book off. But then, with my career, I've always, having my own company, I've always had really great male mentors. A lot of the men that I worked with in the UK, my clients, like multi-millionaires, built very successful companies, I learnt so much from them, and they were always great advocates. But then, when I joined a particular corporation over here, I was very badly bullied by a female, and I had to report into that person because they changed the structure, and I ended up reporting to her. And in the end, after it happened, she was one of those people she would do it to me on my own, when it was with other people, she would be a bit different. So I said to my husband, I'm just not gonna, sorry, I said, I'm in my 40s, I'm just not gonna deal with this shit anymore. I said, I'm gonna give them the ultimatum. He didn't think I would do it, so I then spoke to the GM of the product, and I said that this is what happened. He's like, oh, that's not good. I said, no, if things don't change, I'm out. I said, this has to change, I'm handing my notice. He was like, really? I said, yeah. I said, I'm not standing for it. I said, I'm in my 40s, I'm not dealing with this. So they changed it and changed the structure. So that
I just want to.
I was like,
I just want to thank you both because you've actually been. I think I'm going to give that a round of applause. People, I know that you said you didn't feel like you're on a pedestal. You've written 2 books and a few papers, and you've had sort of appointments. Don't forget about appointments that you work. And then to share the things the way that you got there and some of those things is really important because I think we can all relate to that. Do we have time for a quick question?
No.
No. So that means
We do, but
not here.
But not here.
Yeah,
Where is the after party?
Republic.
Republic.
actually, there's one thing I just want to add to that. So, Catching Forbes, I don't know if you've, it was one of her podcasts I was listening to before I said, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. She actually said you've got to know which hill you're prepared to die on. And it was that. Yeah, so I was like, that is exactly, you've got to know which hill you want to die on. Sometimes you just have to live with it, and that day out. So.
Remember to ask the ladies for the QR codes and all the books and the payment details.
Yeah. And I have got a couple of copies here if anybody would like to buy one, but if not, I can help sign.
Did you remember the first question?
And yes, but no, that's the question.
All right.